Hello, and welcome to my show. My name is Jonathan, and today I've got 3 guests with me who will be answering 2 questions I find very important as I work through my degree in applied linguistics. The questions are, why do some people learn languages more easily than other people? What should we do about it? Let's start by welcoming my first guest, Dr. Jeff Gage. Jeff, how are you doing today? Hi Jonathan, I'm doing well, and you? Just peachy. So tell me, in your opinion, why do some people pick up languages more quickly than others? We all have that friend who went to Germany for a month and came back speaking the language perfectly. And here I am, 32 years old, and I can barely hold a conversation in Greek with my own grandmother. What's up with that? Great question, and I have a pretty simple answer for you. It's all about how engaged the learner is in learning a language. If a learner feels like their learning matters, if they feel like they have control over their learning, and if they feel connected to others in the classroom or people who speak that language, then they'll be more successful at learning that language. Alright, so would it be fair to say that a learner needs to feel competence, autonomy, and relatedness? Exactly. We need these 3 basic psychological needs to be met before we can engage with learning opportunities. And when I talk about engagement, what I mean is the amount, or quantity, and type, or quality, of learners' active participation and involvement in a learning task or activity. Just going through the motions of an activity isn't really the same as engaging with it. Okay, so how do we know the difference? It's not like we can look inside our learners' heads. It may seem subtle at first, but there are 3 dimensions we need to consider to know if a learner is engaged, and their visible behavior is only one of them. We also need to consider the cognitive dimension, what kinds of strategies they use to understand and communicate, how much they interact with an idea or partner, and the affective dimension. Positive emotions are linked to positive learning outcomes, and negative emotions are linked to negative learning outcomes. Where did you come from? Video editing. What? Joshua M. Shaw here, and I'm tired of research pushing emotions, or what you call affect, into a neat little box. Nobody puts language learning anxiety in the corner. I beg your pardon, what's going on and where did the host go? Much of second language acquisition research has considered cognition and emotion, thinking and feeling, to be separate constructs, but the reality is that they're a lot more mixed together than some people like to have us believe. We need to stop thinking about emotions as these wildly uncontrollable things that color our thoughts and make us irrational. The relationship between thoughts and emotions is reciprocal, not causal. It's a 2-way street, baby. Alright, I'm hearing what you're saying, but what does any of this have to do with learning a language? Well, let's look at the long history of emotion research in SLA, shall we? From Moskowitz's humanistic learning in the 70s, Krashen's affective filter hypothesis in the 80s, and Horowitz's work on language learning anxiety in the 90s, we've always considered what emotions our learners are bringing to the classroom and how those emotions enable or hinder them in learning a language. More recently, with what Dr. Aneta Pavlenko has dubbed the affective turn, we are identifying all kinds of problems we were blind to earlier. Researchers were often reducing their scope to a single emotion, anxiety, blech, and discussed it in terms of causal relationships. High anxiety causes bad learning. And the reality is more complicated than that. So when you came in, I was talking about positive emotions being linked to positive learning outcomes and vice versa. Are you disagreeing with that? No. I've seen the same evidence you've seen, and I think it's generally got the right idea. Where I differ from you is how much I see emotions being reduced to discrete categories. Our feelings are fuzzy, and you can't just look at one emotion in isolation. Emotions have also been considered one factor among many that make up individual differences in our learners, but we all have emotions. Saying our emotions are different suggests that there's a right mix of emotions to learning languages. If that's the case, what are we asking of our learners? Well, ideally we want our learners to have good emotional self-regulation. If they're anxious, we want them to have strategies to manage that. And as teachers, we want to set up a classroom that's balanced and not overwhelming. When you talk about anxiety, what I hear is the telltale sign of a disaffected or disengaged student. If we can identify students who are struggling to stay motivated or paying attention to a task, We'll know where to intervene and offer some extra support. That sounds all right, I guess, but why do we need to tell our learners that they're the problem? Whether you say it directly or not, what you're asking us to do is find learners who aren't doing what we want them to do and forcing them to behave. It feels a little icky, doesn't it? What would you suggest then? Talk with all of our learners and ask them all to reflect on times when they struggled. We can talk openly about things like language learning anxiety and how it can affect us all. The problem isn't with individual students. The problem is with how our classrooms are set up. We should be emphasizing collaboration instead of competition, and include, dare I say it, some fun? Whoa, that feels like a personal attack. Engaging tasks can and should be fun. That's part of meeting our students' basic psychological needs. Do they feel connected? Do they feel like they have a stake in their own learning? I still think you're missing the mark a little bit. This concern with specific learning outcomes and focus on causal relationships still feels a little positivistic. Like you're trying to prove a point rather than really trying to learn what's going on. Not to mention the fact that we haven't addressed relations of power, privilege, or ideology yet. This sounds like my cue, but maybe there's someone else who can explain this better than I can. Did someone say relations of power? Oh, hi, Jason. Bonjour, yasas, konnichiwa, hello. Okay, hi. I just heard that there was a discussion of power and privilege starting and thought it was worth talking about my favorite topics, identity and investment. It struck me that so far no one has been talking about what we're doing with language teaching in the first place. Which is? Unless we're considering our own positionality, our identity, and the social roles we inhabit as learners and speakers, we are merely perpetuating existing hegemonic structures that privilege certain identities and populations over others. So, of course there are going to be some people who learn a language more quickly. The deck is stacked in their favor. You're going to have to slow down and define some things for me before I can respond to any of this. With pleasure. According to Bonnie Norton, identity is how a person understands his or her relationship to the world, how that relationship is structured across time and space, and how the person understands possibilities for the future. Basically, our identities, our motivations, our struggles are not fixed positions. We can't just make an engaging task, as you say. We have to consider who our learners are and what they bring to the classroom with them. Okay, so who are our learners? What do they bring to the classroom? It depends. Of course it does. What does it depend on? Where are our classrooms? Are you looking at settler immigrants in North America in the 70s? Are you looking at people in regions impacted by long periods of English colonization? Are you looking at wealthy individuals in OECD countries that are looking for career advancement opportunities? You spoke about basic psychological needs earlier. Is that all there is to it? If learners from all those categories have these 3 simple needs, they'll all be equally motivated to learn a language? In theory. Well, I see a gap in your theory, and it's called power. If we are not actively identifying, challenging, and problematizing power structures in our classrooms, then we aren't doing our students any favors. That seems a little extreme. You mentioned wealthy people looking to advance their careers, but if you're talking about English language learners, isn't that most of the world? And even English speakers want to learn another language to get ahead in the global marketplace. Language teachers are always going to be around to help people reach these real material goals in the here and now. Until you've dismantled these systems you say aren't working, people need to know how to navigate them. And if we aren't creating engaging lessons, we aren't being effective educators. That's fine, and I'm not saying we need to sacrifice the here and now. But instead of focusing on these decontextualized universal concepts, if anything can truly be universal, why don't we at least start with trying to understand the unique struggles different learners experience? Gone are the days where people migrated to a new country and never looked back. We have technology to keep in touch with home communities and more affordable transportation. Why do we have to make learners into model native citizens of a new country? Why can't we honor their existing identity, and instead of giving them skills to navigate a system, we help them develop their ability to move among different systems? So what? Are you saying we should just hold hands and kumbaya and pretend that nations and passports and armies don't exist? That's precisely what I'm saying we need to acknowledge as researchers and educators. Even naming what language is being taught makes a difference. Someone in Japan who is learning English as a foreign language will probably have very different reasons for learning it than an indigenous person in North America trying to reclaim the language through indigenous language vitalization efforts. If you want both those learners to be engaged, as you say, I don't think there are too many quick and easy pedagogical suggestions that would probably address the needs of those two different categories. Nor should there be. Individual differences still exist among learners, I know that. And engagement is of course context-dependent and relational, but all humans, regardless of identity or circumstance, have limited time and attention. At the end of the day, if we're going to do language education, it's up to us as educators and administrators to create classroom conditions that best capture and make use of those limited resources, even if you don't ascribe to self-determination theory and the needs I talked about before, competence, autonomy, relatedness. Make use of those resources to do what? To create successful language learners? But that's my point. Learners invest in a language in order to achieve all kinds of different goals, material or symbolic. You say you want to create successful language learners, but what you really mean is you want to create happy little capitalist subjects who churn the wheels of the economy and don't make too many waves among the racist, sexist, homophobic, and transphobic neighbors. That's not fair. Of course engagement is concerned with power. If there's a power imbalance in our classrooms, that's a big blow to the psychological needs of our most marginalized students. Yes, but I think what we're saying is the best follow-up to that big blow is different. Here, I have a lunch appointment soon. Why don't you keep talking about this with that other guy, Josh, the emotional one? I resent being called that. Whatever. That was a little harsh. I know, we actually agree on a lot of stuff. It's just that when he gets me going about good and bad language learning, it makes me want to pull my hair out. But why are you so resistant to those labels? Consider my position. Regardless of where they come from, emotions are a real factor in how well a learner can focus and learn. Is there not merit in researching what different emotions do and how we can shape a positive learning environment? For example, by focusing on the good things, rather than trying to avoid the bad things. I'm worried that I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but again, that's not my point. My point is that we have all this research looking at tiny, granular psychological constructs that exist within an individual, rather than looking at systemic inequality and ways in which our learners are shut out from a language community. If a learner doesn't feel like they have a place in a community, no amount of soothing them with fun lessons on pop music is going to change their position. All right then. Tell me about bringing learners into a community. Sure. Why don't we start with capital? Oh boy. Not capitalism, capital. Learners, children or adults, have skills and knowledge that are unique to their context and serve as their cultural resources. As an example, let's say we have a refugee from a war-torn country who has come to Canada to seek some stability. Just because they're entering the country with limited funds and maybe some credentials that our country doesn't recognize, that doesn't mean they're not a whole human being. They've got plenty of knowledge and they know how to speak at least one language quite fluently. What they're missing is the ability to express all that in English. If we design education systems in schools that focus on expanding people's linguistic repertoires, rather than making them start from scratch like a child, we're saying, hey, we know you're an adult and we know you have a lot to contribute to our society. Let's help you feel included and invested in this place. You just used that word. Invested? No. Feel. You yourself just admitted that feelings matter. You're not talking about creating justice. You're talking about creating the feeling of justice. And that's as much a part of emotions as everything else I've talked about. I am talking about justice. Of course you are. You've made it abundantly clear that you want research to take an activist direction. And maybe that's outside the scope of this little chat. But what is in our dialogue right now is that we both agree that it's important to make our students feel positive emotions. About learning a language, about being in a new community, about embracing the complex, multifaceted psychological phenomena that are emotions and identity. The two go hand in hand. Who we think we are and how we understand ourselves relative to the rest of the world produces feelings in us. And those feelings then go on to produce more ideas about who we think we are. You can't totally tease our two perspectives apart. And the more quickly you consider how important emotions are in the whole human being you just mentioned, the more quickly we can move to a place where we consider together the entire ecology of supporting learners. From learning tasks, to classrooms, to institutions, to nations, to entire language communities. N'est-ce pas? Ugh, some days I think you're more annoying than I am. I'm out. I have a rally to march in. Wow, I guess I missed the whole thing, didn't I? It's fine. I don't know if it went exactly like you expected anyway. Well, any closing remarks since you're the last one here? Sure. We've spent the past 15 minutes talking about learners and supporting them, but all of us have failed to consider the identities, engagement, and emotions of teachers. Especially with the latest breakthroughs in technology, what is the role of teachers going to be in the future? Why do we need to think about learner motivation at all if they can just pull out their phones and have it do all the languaging? Don't worry, I'm being rhetorical. Okay, thank you. I guess that's all the time we have for today, folks. Keep fighting your good fights, and I'll see you the next time I get to use a video submission for a school assignment.